Welcome, everybody, to the Cover 2 podcast. I am Cardinals fan Nick Nenad.
And I am not Cardinals fan And
Smith. And today, guys, we have a fantastic podcast for you. Big news out of the NBA we will get into later. It's kind of opened up. The trade possibilities have opened up as the NBA draft is coming up soon. And we already have a big-time trade involving a future Hall of Famer already that's happened today, and we will go over that. But we want to start with the NFL because it's Monday. Jared, we don't get to record on Mondays. You're seeing this on Tuesday if you're watching it. But we're going to play a little Monday morning quarterback. We're going to go back to the basics of early in this podcast or early in the NFL season where we would go. We'd analyze 2 games, and then we'd look forward to 1 game each next week. So we're gonna do that for sure. Obviously, if you guys know, there was a great ending to the Cardinals game that pushed us to 6-3. I will get to that a little bit later, but we're gonna get all the house cleaning out of the way, and we're gonna get the other football teams out of the way before I blow a gasket on the Cardinals. And I can't wait to get this beanie off because it's way too hot. So, Jared, why don't you start us off with some NFL talk? What game do you want to go over first?
Yeah, no, the most interesting game to me, other than the Cardinals' miraculous comeback against the Bills, was the Sunday night game when Baltimore went into New England and was not only favored, but is the better team, right? And should have easily waxed the Patriots, right? We saw last Monday night the Patriots had to fight and claw, and the game almost went into overtime against the 0-8 New York Jets, right? So we're looking at a Patriots team right now that was coming in not at 100%. They don't have any weapons on offense other than Cam Newton. The defense is mediocre at best. You know, they're okay. They're not the typical New England Patriots team that we expect to see. And so going into that game last night, I was like, oh, Baltimore is going to run. They're going to run them over. And then I saw that it was raining, the rainstorms going on all over the place. And I'm like, this is perfect for Baltimore. They love to run the football. They have a great defense. And Lamar Jackson's going to run all over them, right? And lo and behold, the Patriots come out. They run a couple trick plays. They have Jacoby Myers, a former quarterback. He's kind of like the next Julian Edelman that head coach Bill Belichick has miraculously found. He throws a touchdown pass to Rex Burkhead on a trick play. And then we see Cam Newton James White and the other host of running backs that are just able to kind of really manage the game, control the clock the entire way. And it seemed like the Patriots were in complete control. And I was stunned. To me, what this game showed was not really about the Patriots, but more so that Baltimore, they're a bunch of frauds. I do not trust Baltimore anymore. I think they're a good team. I think they will be right there in the mix for that AFC North division title with the Pittsburgh Steelers. But to me, they're frauds. I don't trust them. I would not bet on them anymore. Like I said, I don't understand how they play so poorly when the game was set up for them to succeed, right? But Lamar Jackson is not a drop back pure passer like a Tom Brady or an Aaron Rodgers, right? They have a run scheme completely. They run the ball like 65% of the time, which is one of the highest percentages in all of the NFL, and yet they cannot get it going in a rainy type of game situation. I'm a little dumbfounded, really, right? They had Mark Ingram coming back off of an injury. He was missed for the last 2 weeks. So you get your starting running back. You have J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards. That is a very good 3-headed trio running back, plus Lamar Jackson. And in total, if I'm not mistaken, they ran for 115 yards. I'm sorry, but you need to average more than 115 yards on the New England Patriots, when just a few weeks ago, the San Francisco 49ers had over 250 yards on the Patriots, right? So basically what I'm trying to say is if you're Baltimore, I think they need to look at themselves in the mirror. I think they're filling themselves a little too much. It's like obviously the Steelers are undefeated and they're looking up at them right now. But Baltimore might just be playing for a wild card spot at this point. I don't know if Baltimore can even catch up to Pittsburgh, because the way that Pittsburgh is playing, they're playing like their backs are against the wall, even though they're undefeated. They're not taking weeks off or games off or even plays off. And with Baltimore, I don't see that same type of want it attitude like they had last year. It just seems like two completely different teams. Even though Baltimore didn't really lose many players this offseason, they actually gained more than they lost. So I'm just confused. I don't know if you can help me out with this one, but at the end of the day, Baltimore, they're a bunch of frauds, and I do not trust them.
Hey, Jared, I'm glad you're jumping on the train because I have the last few weeks, especially, I have really been tough on Lamar Jackson. Unfortunately, not on this podcast. If you go over and look at my Twitter account, you'll see my slander of Lamar Jackson. And as we see week to week, Kyler Murray run for 50, 60 yards, and other quarterbacks have more success on the ground. Lamar Jackson and the Ravens offense is one-dimensional. Here's what I've heard about the Ravens, too. I've heard that teams are just stacking the box and looking for Lamar to run. And he's been stopped pretty much. We haven't seen Lamar go off like he did last year. Teams are starting to scheme him. We heard that teams are calling out plays, I think, last week. They were calling out what play was going to be run. Jared, I was watching the game. I was calling out plays they were going to run. Okay, while I'm watching my TV. Nobody can hear me, but I was calling out plays. This team, Jared, you say something that's very smart about the NFL, and it's that the NFL stands for not for long. And that also works in schemes. Some schemes don't work for that long. They might surprise you for a year. I mean, look back how many times this has happened, right? Carolina Panthers go 15-1, go to the Super Bowl. They've been trash ever since. The Los Angeles Rams haven't been the same since they went to the Super Bowl, and their scheme worked out. I'm sure the same thing will happen to Kyler Murray and the Arizona Cardinals next year too. It's just this rate. They need to figure it out. Now we have Harden kind of arguing with Lamar Jackson on the sideline. He wants him to throw a ball. Lamar Jackson forces the ball to him and throws a horrible interception. This team needs to figure it out. Jim Harbaugh and the rest of the coaching staff needs to wrangle them around. And Jared, like you said, they're 3 games back of the Steelers now. You're not going to win the division. I'm sorry. This isn't other divisions where there's 1 game in between. The Ravens need to battle for that 5th spot. Play an average playoff team going into the playoffs, and you just got to figure out yourself, because you will make the playoffs, but figure out yourself for the actual playoff rounds, because you're not getting that bye and you're not winning the AFC North.
Yeah. Really quickly, I want to get on to your first review of the week. You mentioned scheme and how teams have been able to basically figure out what Baltimore is doing. Guess what? Yeah. That happens every single year. You know what you do as a Baltimore team? You adjust. You counter what teams are now doing.
They're not adjusting, though.
So if Lamar wants to come out and say, well, teams know what we're going to run, then change your calls, right? Instead of, calling something like Oski, call it Raven. You know what I mean? Like literally change up the names of your run schemes. Change. You're supposed to counter. Football is a chess match for those who have not played the sport before, right? You're never going to be the complete innovator, even though we really haven't seen a Lamar Jackson type of offense like we saw last year before in the NFL. But guess what? Once teams get a complete offseason to study you and figure out, okay, this is how we're going to stop you, it is then on that team to come back and counter what the defenses are doing. And so far, the Baltimore Ravens have not been able to counter what other teams are doing. And so I don't want to hear about, teams know what plays you're running. Yeah, that's their job. The defense is supposed to study and supposed to try to figure out what you're doing. And especially how you mentioned when the Ravens are more one-dimensional, how they like to run the ball a lot and they're not a drop-back passing team. Of course, when they line up with a fullback and 2 running backs in the backfield, it is more likely than not that they're going to run the football, right? So counter what the defense is doing and stop complaining. Plain and simple.
Yeah, no, that's what it is. And here, this is the honest truth about Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson will end up being a fantastic NFL quarterback. Some may say he already is.
He already is.
Well, no, but Jared, his throwing ability, if he was playing on a team that didn't have this system, he wouldn't have had the year he had last year. But that works. There's truth to some people that Tom Brady and the Patriots system is the reason that he won 6 Super Bowls, right? Lamar Jackson, you can win if you have the perfect system, the perfect coach, and the perfect offensive coordinator. You don't knock a guy for that. But when it's not working and you're not adjusting and teams are like, well, Lamar, throw it, and they're not succeeding and they're losing the big games, there's something wrong. So Lamar Jackson needs to, hunker down, make the smart throws, and realize that his running ability this season is not as good as it was last year because teams are scheming them better. Adjust. They got to be able to throw the ball, and you got to be able to get, like Mark Andrews, Hollywood Brown, you got to get open. Don't call for the ball. You got to get open so Lamar can throw you the ball. Now, I will give him this. The reason they lost to New England last night, though, Jared, is because it was raining super hard, and Lamar already doesn't have good throwing ability, and now he has to play in the rain.
I want to hear that.
Jared, that's an excuse.
Don't stop making excuses for them.
On.
They're a running football team.
That's the only excuse I'm going to make for him. Yeah, no, I know. And that was
sleet or snow. A running game should be able to travel anywhere. I don't want to hear that.
I had a feeling too on New England's first drive. I was like, oh, New England's in this game because this is what New England. Cam Newton's team. He's running people over and stuff. It was old school. So I'm sure that they'll improve by the end of the season. But one of the things, Jared, we do need to move on. But I just want to mention, you said there's time to adjust. Well, next week they got Tennessee. Okay, they got Tennessee. Then they got Thursday Night Football on Thanksgiving against the Steelers.
Yeah, good luck.
So then you have the grueling game against the Steelers, right? And you get 10 days off. No, they don't get 10 days off. They have to play next Thursday, albeit against the Dallas Cowboys. But still, prime time, less time to get ready. And then they finally get the 10, 11-day break to play again. So they have a very difficult schedule coming up, and I find it hard. They're not going to go 3-0 in this stretch. They might lose to Tennessee next week. They might lose to Pittsburgh, and who knows? They might even lose to Dallas if they don't figure things out. So we'll see what ends up happening to the Ravens, but it's not looking good for the division win. You'll still make the playoffs, so get ready for the playoffs. Don't worry about your seeding. If you're the Ravens team of last year, you can beat anybody. All right, I want to move to two other great teams, and that's Seattle and Los Angeles Rams. This was a very interesting game. A lot of people, thought Seattle, the 7-2 team that's been running over everybody, winning a ton of games, winning a ton of big games, barely losing to the Cardinals in overtime. They thought, okay, Seattle's going to win. And then you see Rams are favored. And then a lot of people on TV are going, the Rams are going to win. And sure enough, look what happens. Jared Goff doesn't get pressured, and the Rams win handily. I want to say this, though. It's not really about the Rams, because I think the Rams, they're as good as Jared Goff's going to be. So if Jared Goff plays bad, the Rams probably lose, unless they're playing a terrible team. It's the same goes with Seattle, but it's much, much worse. And it all goes through Russell Wilson. Okay, when you talk about like MVP talk, which I'm going to talk about when I talk about the Thursday Night Football game a little later, you look at Russell Wilson and you go, if Russell Wilson wasn't on the Seahawks, would they win a game?
They might be worse than the Jets. I don't know.
They have the 32nd ranked defense that gets worse and worse. It goes 33rd, 34th. Like, they're so bad. Their defense, you could almost put Ohio State's defense on the field for Seattle, and it's the same thing. I'm just saying. Clemson's defense, whoever you want to say, Alabama, right? This is the problem with the Seattle Seahawks. Whatever their record ends up being, we talk about frauds with the Ravens. Seattle are frauds. They find ways to win because of their quarterback that might be one of the best of all time. But just like what we saw with the Patriots last year, Tom Brady and legendary quarterback can only get you so far if your defense and your other weapons are atrocious. And that's what we have with the Seahawks here. Interesting note about Russell Wilson. Again, we're talking about MVP candidates. He's going lower and lower on the tiers like we are here in California with the coronavirus restrictions. Okay?
Let's not bring that up.
Every single week, Russell Wilson gets worse and worse. I have the stats right here against the Rams. He has 3 turnovers, 1 fumble loss, and 2 interceptions. Jared, 0 touchdowns, by the way, in that game from Sir Russell Wilson. And against the Bills, when they gave up 44 points on defense, he had 2 interceptions and 2 fumbles lost. So, you look at the savior of Russell Wilson, and if he doesn't perform, they have no chance. And the last 2 weeks, Buffalo killed them. I don't want to look at what the score ended up being. Buffalo killed them. And the Rams, in a lot of ways, dominated them and didn't allow Russell Wilson to be the focal point. So, if you're looking at as a team at how to defend Seattle, just stop Russell Wilson. I know that's hard and that's easier said than done. But if you stop Russell Wilson, anybody can beat this team. And that's why I'm excited about Thursday Night Football this week. But I will get to that a little bit later. Jared, you want to talk about another game, but more specifically, another legendary quarterback. Let the audience know what you want to say here.
Right. And this is the 49ers who faced the Saints yesterday. The Saints ended up winning the game 27-13. Nothing really to write home about, except for the fact that Drew Brees left the game in the third quarter with broken ribs and what turns out to be also a punctured lung. Now, we're learning today that before the game, Drew Brees already had a bruised rib. And when he got tackled and sacked hard and basically, got driven into the ground, he ended up cracking a few more ribs, and that's how the punctured lung happened as well. I believe he actually went out for another series or two and threw a touchdown to Alvin Kamara, which just shows the toughness of this guy. But I think eventually there was the camera was on him, and he went up to head coach Sean Payton, see the look in his eye, and he was like, I can't go, man. Right. And you immediately saw Jameis Winston get his helmet on and go in and basically take over. And it was Jameis Winston and Taysom Hill who were kind of going back and forth, splitting reps at the quarterback position. So this really isn't necessarily about the game, but more so the, long-term injury that Drew Brees is potentially facing. Right. Because as a quarterback, you need if your ribs are hurt and you're throwing the ball, you are now exposing
that's
the middle of your body to get hit by big old 300-pound defensive ends. And so, listen, the Saints right now are sitting at 7-2 in first place. They obviously whooped on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers last week. The Bucs looked really good and came back and got a win against Carolina. So it's almost like a neck and neck race with those two teams. But are we going to trust that Jameis Winston is going to be able to keep this team going for 2 to 3 weeks? Drew Brees has come out and said he only wants to miss one game. It's very admirable of him. And, fortunately, I don't know what it's like to have a cracked or a broken rib or a punctured lung, but it doesn't sound good, right?
No,
like I said, what's his mobility going to be like? Because obviously he is by far, right, a Hall of Fame quarterback, the best quarterback on that roster. But is Drew Brees at 75 or 80% better than Jameis Winston at 100%? I think that's going to be the big question for Sean Payton and the Saints going into their, these next few weeks. Can they afford to roll with Jameis Winston and potentially lose a game or two, and still win this division? Or is this an opportunity for Tampa Bay to jump New Orleans and go ahead? Just looking at the next few games for the Saints, they're at home against the Falcons, which should be a win because the Falcons are obviously garbage. And then they're at Denver to face the Broncos, who the Broncos are respectable, but let's face it, they have a bunch of injuries and they're not really a good team. And then the Saints are at the Falcons again. So the next 3 weeks, those are all three very winnable games.
And they're at the Eagles the next week,
not to knock Jameis Winston, but Jameis Winston last year should have been a defensive MVP as a quarterback because he threw 30 interceptions, right? He was basically gift wrapping, interceptions for defenders last year. So I don't trust Jameis Winston. I think he's in a better situation. He has more talent around him than he did with the Bucs last year. So, maybe as a team, they can rally around him and make Jameis look better. But, depending on how long Drew Brees is out, the Saints might be in a little bit of trouble here. What do you think?
It's very interesting because when you bring up the schedules, I kind of disagree with you a little bit on the Falcons. The Falcons have been playing a lot better. Yeah, their defense is garbage and their offense is inconsistent. But if we were looking at the Falcons and they had won some of those crazy ending games that they have, they'd be a 4-5, 5-4 team right now. We'd be talking about them possibly making the playoffs. So I look at them. Yes,
you are what your record says you are, and they're currently a 3-6 team, which means you are not good.
No, they're not good, Jared. I'm just saying they're not the Jets. They're not the Cowboys this year. They're not, what I'm saying? Like, they're not the worst team in the league. Jared, I'm sorry. They're in last place in the worst division in the league.
You know what? You know why I'm wearing this Cowboy shirt today? It's because Dallas didn't lose this Sunday. You want to know why? Because they had a bye.
And Jared, guess what? They actually gained in the division race too, because it's crazy, man. I almost talked about Eagles and Giants, but I was like, I don't want the viewers to turn off the podcast, So, but when you look at the Falcons, they play the Falcons, 2 out of 3 weeks here. Remember, Jared, it's division opponent, right? We see these division matchups where some teams just can't beat a bad team. How many times have the Cardinals beaten the Seahawks in Seattle when nobody else can? They beat them, They beat them with Brett Hundley last year. They beat them with Carson Palmer when they had the Legion of Boom, in the beginnings of the Bruce Arians era in Arizona. So there's a lot, and there's plenty of other matchups like that. I just bring up the one I'm close to home with. But so those aren't as easy a games. But I will say this: when you look at Tampa's schedule, they got the Rams on Monday Night Football next week. That's a tough matchup. They got the Chiefs the next week. And then they got the Vikings, who've been playing a lot better too. Not that they're a great team, but Tampa,
boy, can ball.
Yeah, I mean, we're not gonna be able to talk about the Vikings and Bears, which we probably wouldn't talk about anyone in this podcast. But we get to see Dalvin Cook rush tonight against that Bears defense. That should be really interesting. But getting back to current stuff, it's very, very interesting with Tampa Bay. They almost have to act like this Rams game and this Chiefs game are like playoff games, because they need to win 2 out of 3 of these games in order to stay in it with the Saints. The Buccaneers are 7-3, the Saints are 7-2, and the Saints have the advantage completely over Tampa, having beaten them twice. Do I think Jameis Winston and Taysom Hill both can defeat the Broncos and Falcons at least 2 times? Yes, I do. Do I think that Tampa can beat the Rams, Chiefs, and Vikings 3 weeks? I don't know. So it's more about Tampa in this situation bearing down and acting like this is the divisional playoff round and the wild card playoff round, and just trying to get a win, at least one win out of there, and then they actually get a bye before they play the Vikings. So just go hard as hell the next 2 games, 2 games in 6 days, and try to win it. But yeah, it's the best possible time, Jared, for Drew Brees to get hurt, because they end up playing, they play the Eagles, not a very good team, obviously, but a team that's not the worst team in the world. And then they play the Chiefs and they play the Vikings, and they end up with the Panthers. So they don't have, that Chiefs game, again, when you're neck and neck in a division race, one loss can mean it. And if they lose a bunch of games here without Drew Brees, Tampa has a chance. It should be very, very interesting in the AFC or the NFC South. All right, let me get back to my notes real quick. All right, last game we're going to talk about, Jared. This was my favorite game of the week. Okay, it was the Buffalo Bills.
Yeah, like 2 minutes to just rant. Go ahead and fanboy out.
We got the Buffalo Bills, Josh Allen and company, Stephon Diggs, Tre'Davious White coming into town, coming into Arizona to play a nice big time game. 7-2. We're 5-3, having a bad loss last week. Back and forth game. Kyler has another rushing touchdown, actually 2 rushing touchdowns in the game. And Josh Allen's played. Josh Allen's throwing interceptions. It's back and forth. Larry Fitzgerald, real weird interception, right? And then Patrick Peterson lets Stephon Diggs get behind him, and with 30 seconds left, Buffalo takes a 4-point lead, which means we can't kick a field goal. Jared, I was pissed. I was like, you know what? Patrick Peterson's old. This is 2 weeks in a row that we've lost. Now, first of all, Patrick Peterson still is old. I'm just going to say that right now, and he needs to step it up against these number 1 receivers, because we can't have this happen again. But then, Jerry, we have 2 timeouts. Kyler goes down the field. He makes another big run. A nice throw to Hopkins, a nice throw to Andy Isabella. And there's 11 seconds on the clock. You see the defense line up for Buffalo, and they're not at the end zone. They're at like the 20-yard line. And so I'm telling the people I'm watching the game with, I'm like, we'll probably just throw a little out, get a little closer. We'll try to just throw like a 30-yard pass. Play starts. Kyler runs left. Any other quarterback, maybe except Lamar Jackson, he doesn't get sacked. He whirls around, throws it as far as he can to the end zone. And who's there, Jared? That's old DeAndre Hopkins. Thank you again, Bill O'Brien, for that. DeAndre Hopkins goes over 3 Bills defenders and catches a Hail Mary. You know what happened. I don't need to recite it for you. Jared, I could not be happier. I was telling you before the podcast started that we deserve that win in a lot of ways, because the Fitzgerald interception that happened was the strangest interception I've ever seen. he hit the ground. The ball popped up like 10 yards and went right into their safety. Right? We were driving down the field, wasting clock. We were rushing like 10 yards a game or 10 yards a play. And this weird, awkward interception to a wide open Fitzgerald happens. And it's almost like the football gods were like, you know what? If you make a good enough throw, since you in the Texans had that Hopkins trade, and that was a horrible trade. You see the football gods affecting the Houston Texans now with like one win this season. They're like, you know what? We'll give you the win. We just saw the Rams beat Seattle. We'll give you this win. So Cardinals go to 6-3. Buffalo drops to 7-3. Jerry, I actually wanted to discuss this a little bit in this game. It's all great about the Cardinals, and it's showing you that Kyler and DeAndre Hopkins is a match made in heaven. And the Cardinals are, they play hard and their games are entertaining. What's interesting here, though, is Buffalo loses this game. Miami's won 3 in a row with Tua. If Miami wins this week, they're in first place. The Miami Dolphins, Jared, who would have said that last year, that the next year they'd be in first place? Who would have said that when they bench Ryan Fitzpatrick, they'd be, and they're saying, oh, we're only playing Tua because we want to see if he sucks. That's what they're saying about Tua. Tua goes out there 3 games in a row, beat my Cardinals last week. Thank you, Zane Gonzalez, again for that one. And they're 6-3. So, Jared, I want to just ask you before I get to my matchup for Thursday Night Football with the Cardinals and Seahawks, what do you think about this Miami-Buffalo race, specifically more about Miami? I mean, if you want to comment about the Hail Mary, you can too, of course.
Yeah, no, I'll answer the first question first. Miami's legitimate, right? And Tua, they are not. There's no more. They're letting him fly. They're letting him loose. He doesn't have. There's no like resistance on him, right? The first game it was like, oh well, obviously he hasn't played since that crazy hip injury in college that he had almost a year ago to the date. Is he going to be on a count limit? Are they going to, let him kind of run play action and bootlegs? Are they going to try to just keep him in the pocket? And they have completely let it loose. Right now, it's not like he's throwing 300 and 400-yard passing games. He's not Patrick Mahomes out here, but he is in complete control of the offense, right? And he's spreading the ball around, getting everyone involved. And I think it's what this has done? It's almost like a breath of fresh air, and nothing against Ryan Fitzpatrick, right? He has been a very steady, almost like a model citizen, right? Like the guy, he'll get you from A to B, but he's not very flashy. He just kind of goes out and does his job. But I think we also have to give credit to Miami's defense and special teams because they are balling out. I believe in the last 3 weeks, Miami's defense and special teams combined have 5 touchdowns. Right. So that would be multiple interceptions / fumble recoveries that they have returned for touchdowns. So they are helping Tua. Right. So this isn't all Tua going out there and scoring these points. He doesn't have to because his defense and special teams are playing so well. And that's what we like to call complementary football. Right. When all 3 phases of your team are clicking and playing well, your quarterback doesn't have to be a superstar. He doesn't have to throw it 40 or 50 times a game. You can run the football. I don't even know who. I have to look him up here really quick. But the Miami Dolphins, they were down to like their 4th string running back in this game. And he still had a touchdown and a good amount of. So, right. So, Miami's just playing complementary football, and they're playing with depth guys. They're not even playing with all of their starters right now. So if Miami can get a little bit healthier, Buffalo needs to watch out because Buffalo is still a good team and they're still going to be right there in contention. But Miami, they're not. I don't think they're sneaking up on anyone anymore. At the beginning of the season, we could have said that, but Tua looks like he's for real, and this Dolphins team as a whole looks like they're for real right now. So I would say it is a 2-team race with Buffalo and Miami, and I am not putting it out of the question that Miami can win this division. And if I'm not mistaken, Miami has not won this division since 2008. So it has been 12 years of complete and utter dominance by the New England Patriots. And I can almost guarantee that the Patriots will not win this division for a 13th straight year. So that streak will come to an end.
Yeah. So again, Jared, we look back at schedules. We look at schedules again. And the Bills have the week off. They have a bye. They'll get rested. They'll cry a little bit more about the Hail Mary and stuff like that. And then they play the Chargers. But again, Miami plays this week. They play the Broncos. That's a very winnable game if they're 7-3. And then, Jared, you know who they play after that? The next 2 games? The Jets and Bengals. So
wow.
They're going to be 9-3, Jared.
Wow.
If they beat Denver, they're 9-3. They're 9-3. You know who the Bills play? They play the Chargers, 49ers, Steelers. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's tough. The 49ers might even have Jimmy G back. Well, actually, they probably, maybe. I forget what the timetable for is Jimmy G playing, but the 49ers are still a formidable team. They're not a horrible team. They can't beat a team like the Bills. And for example, the Cardinals rushed over 200 yards against the Bills. So a run-first team in the 49ers can beat them. But we'll get on to next week's games. But it's like you said, Jared, looking at the schedules too, at least the next few games, Miami has a chance to be a 9-3 football team. The Bills probably won't be 9-3 when it comes to this, having the same record. So very, very interesting there. All right, I'm going to get on to my Thursday night matchup. I went on social media. I didn't even think we'd be able to podcast about this game, Jared. I even said it on my Instagram. Well, I wanted to talk about it. So first of all, I need to take this off because I am burning up. I'm going to switch to a Cardinals hat real quick. And that's, Jared, you don't even imagine how good I feel about putting this hat on. I was like burning up. My AirPods are getting pushed in my ear. Guys, if you're the NFL, if you're the NFL, I have coffee, it's fine. If you're the NFL and you saw the Sunday night game on NBC and you saw the Hail Mary last week, also, if you're Fox and you're Joe Buck and you're Troy Aikman, you're like, unreal that we have Cardinals versus Seahawks on Thursday Night Football. It's one of the best, if not the best matchup this week. Jared will get into another matchup in a second that I'm really excited about too. But, Seahawks open up as a -3 favorite. I mean, this game is essentially, will Kyler be able to make enough plays? Russell Wilson be able to make enough plays, right? But both these defenses aren't that good. I know the Cardinals' defensive rating is good, but most of those big-time defensive plays came against, like, the Jets and the Cowboys and the Redskins. You know what I'm saying? It's not what it looks like. When they've played against good teams, they've given up a lot of scores. Look at the last 3 games they've played. The Cardinals are giving up a lot on defense, and we just might have lost Corey Peters. We already lost Chandler Jones. We've had COVID issues on defense. So it's going to be a shootout, but pretty much, Jared, this is about who makes the better plays. Will Russell Wilson throw another 3 interceptions against the Cardinals? I doubt it, but when you look at what he's done in the last 2-3 weeks, he's turned the ball over 10 times. It's insane. Like it really is. It really is crazy for Russell Wilson. Most of his turnovers have come in the last 4 games. Kyler, not immune to turnovers. Kenyon Drake had one of the worst fumbles I've ever seen last week. So the Cardinals are, they can turn the ball over. I do think the Cardinals have more firepower on offense, so they have that. But I think this game's going to be really coming down to which quarterback plays better. And right now it's trending as Kyler Murray. But I'm not going to sit here and say the Cardinals have an easy win. What I will say is I do think my Cardinals have the momentum to win this game. So I will pick them to win the game, but it will be a 1-possession game. This will be a close one, and it will be a fun one. I think it will be testing that over a 58 points game, and you probably want to talk about this still.
Oh, no doubt. And I'm just excited that we have a legitimate Thursday night football matchup. Obviously, if there's football on, I'm game. I'm down to watch. But usually what the NFL schedule makers tend to do for Thursday night football is put these smaller market teams on. Like we always see like Jacksonville and Tennessee, and those types of teams playing on Thursday night football. And they're usually like yawn fests, right? I mean, obviously Tennessee is a very formidable team over the last 1.5, 2 years. But, going back last 4 or 5, those games, it's almost just like, yeah, you put it on in the background and you're usually doing something else. No. This Thursday night, you're going to be glued to the television set because you're right. It is the Russell Wilson versus Kyler Murray show. I'm not even going to say Seattle versus Arizona. It is Russell Wilson versus Kyler Murray, right? Whoever plays better, more than likely that team will win. So I'm very intrigued. And if you're Seattle, I think this is almost a must win, right? We've seen Arizona in the last couple of weeks have close losses and close victories. But I'm with you. I think Arizona is the overall better team offensively and defensively. Seattle, it is really Russell Wilson, DK Metcalf, and Tyler Lockett. And the defense is god awful. You mentioned earlier in the show, dead last in total defense. they cannot stop a nosebleed, right? Their run defense is pitiful, even though they just signed Carlos Dunlap, formerly of the Cincinnati Bengals, and I believe they signed another defender as well. But so far, they can't get pressure on the quarterback, and they can't get sacks, and then they can't stop the run, right? So if you're Russell Wilson, it makes a little more sense as to why his turnover ratio has picked up, because I think he's pressing a little bit. I think Russell Wilson has had to try to take more chances to try to make more plays, because he understands that his defense is not coming up to the table and not doing their jobs, right? Even though they've got Jamal Adams, one of the best, not only safeties in the game, but just best athletes and best players in all of the NFL, he can only do so much, right? So the defense is awful, and Russell Wilson is having to kind of take chances, to make plays on his own. So it's like I said, not totally surprising that his interception to touchdown ratio has gone up a little bit, but I'm very excited for this game. Typically, we would say Seattle at home, a night game, the 12th man, that crowd is going to be a lot for Arizona to deal with. Obviously, there's no fans in the stands this time, so Arizona gets a break there. And I'm going to pick Arizona to win this game, because coming off of that huge win, that huge Hail Mary pass, I think they're going to ride that momentum into this Thursday night game. And I see Arizona, not handedly winning. I think it'll be close, but I think Arizona wins by a touchdown.
Jared, I'm with you similar on the score. It just seems like it's got to be. It almost is like really Russell Wilson has to win the game, because Kyler has so many other weapons, and the Cardinals defense isn't atrocious. I think if Kyler Murray doesn't throw a bunch of interceptions and nobody fumbles the ball, it should be a Cardinals win. So very interesting. Now, Jared, you have another big game you want to talk about. It's the Sunday night game. Educate the audience on why this game is so important.
That's right. We've got another nationally televised spotlight game with the Raiders and the Chiefs. The Chiefs coming off a bye. They're sitting at 8-1 right now. And, they've been able to get healthy. Obviously, we know the crazy amount of weapons that they have on offense. And their defense is playing well enough, right? They're not a dominant defense at all. They're kind of more of a bend, don't break. But that's all they need to be, right? They create some turnovers. They've got a great defensive tackle in Chris Jones. You've got Tyrone Honey Badger, back there. You're one of your favorite players, I know, former Cardinal right there. I know you actually, we won't get into it, but I know that you've actually you've gone back and forth with him personally on Twitter before. So we'll have to get into that in another episode. But so this Kansas City Chiefs team not only comes in 8-1, but they come in well rested, and had an extra week to prepare for the Raiders. So to me, this game is about the Raiders sitting at 6-3, coming off of a good win this past week against the Broncos. And to me, if the Raiders can come out and win this game, I think we need to really take a serious look at the Raiders at being a legitimate contender for the playoffs. Right now, the Raiders are kind of like they're teetering back and forth. They look good some weeks, and other weeks they just can't put it together offensively. If the Raiders want to be looked at as a legitimate team this year, a postseason team that can potentially make some noise, they need to go out and beat the best team in their division and potentially the best team in all of the AFC, right? Home game, Sunday night, everyone's watching Sunday Night Football. I really want to see how the Raiders come out and respond. Like I said, if the Raiders come out and win this game, I'm on the Raiders bandwagon, and I think they, really make it into the playoffs and can actually make some noise. If they come out and they put up a dud, then this just shows me that the Raiders they're more frauds, right? And I've used that word more than I have in most podcasts, but I will put them in that fraud category with the Baltimore Ravens if the Raiders cannot come out and win this game, to me.
Yeah, I mean, well, the Raiders too. They do have the advantage of beating the Chiefs in the first matchup, but they're still 6-3 and the Chiefs are 8-1. So if you lose again, you have no chance of winning the division, and you're going to be, potentially even facing them again in the playoffs because the fact that the Steelers might have that number one seed. The Chiefs might end up, so you don't want to play them again in the playoffs. I guess you'd probably rather play a division opponent than anybody in the playoffs, but yeah, Raiders need to win this game. I just want to mention one thing really quickly. The thing about the Seattle-Arizona game, real quick to go into, you mentioned Seattle in the crowd. The Cardinals, I believe it's the last 4 out of 5 years, have won in Seattle. Like 4 out of 5 years, they've won in Seattle. The only year they lost is when they had Steve Wilkes and debacle with Josh Rosen, and they were horrible. And even in that game, they competed and I think lost by 1 possession. So the Cardinals love playing in Seattle. Another reason why, if you're on the betting train, you might want to go with Arizona. I'm sure I will lose a ton of people money, including myself, with these picks. But yeah, Raiders Chiefs. I'm excited. I really hope John Gruden beats him. You have 8 or 7-3 Raiders, 8-2 Chiefs, and then the Chiefs are like, well, we can't end up the same record as the Raiders, right? Because it'd be interesting. John Gruden's finally getting his system a little bit going. Can he beat the Chiefs twice? I would not guess it. I would go Chiefs this week. All right, we need to get into some NBA news. Nothing new has come across the board so far since we've started the podcast. So if something does happen later this Monday night, obviously you know why we hadn't mentioned it. But the biggest thing that happened, Jared, Chris Paul is getting traded to the Phoenix Suns. Yes, those Phoenix Suns that have been atrocious the last 4 years are getting CP3. They're trading Kelly Oubre Jr., Ricky Rubio, and young players Ty Jerome and Jalen Leck, and also a 2022 first-round pick. Jared, your first thoughts on hearing this, that CP3 is now on the Sun?
I think I'm not surprised that Chris Paul is now gone and no longer in Oklahoma City. I think that was a foregone conclusion. And even when Oklahoma City traded for Chris Paul last offseason, it was almost like, he was going to be a 1-year rental at most. And if I'm not mistaken, this past year's deadline before the pandemic took place, Oklahoma City was looking to trade Chris Paul at that point, right? And obviously Oklahoma City was able to go into the bubble and actually make some noise and be a real contender. And they took the Houston Rockets to 7 games, right? So they almost made it, into the second round, a more formidable team than many people thought. So we have to give Chris Paul and that team credit there. But it doesn't surprise me that Chris Paul is traded. What does surprise me with the Suns is the Suns, who kind of made some noise in the bubble themselves, going 8-0 undefeated. And obviously, you've got Devin Booker as the face of that franchise. But who are the Suns in reality, right? I'm looking at their depth chart right now, and you've got DeAndre Ayton, Devin Booker, and does Chris Paul put them in that playoff contention category, right? Chris Paul's obviously up there. I believe he's 34, 35, right? 35, so he's not the player he used to be, but he can still play. But I mean, what is this team right now? Because I'm looking at their starting lineup. You've got Chris Paul at the point guard position, Devin Booker that'll play the 2, McCall Bridges, Cameron Johnson, and then DeAndre Ayton. Bridges and Cameron Johnson haven't really heard too much of. And really looking at their bench right now, when you trade away Ricky Rubio and the other 3 players, that is kind of a depleted, depth chart that I'm looking at for the Suns right now. And so it's really going to have to be on their starters to carry this team for an entire 72-game season, because unless they go out and make another trade or have a splash in this upcoming draft that'll be on Wednesday, just 2 days from now, I don't really know if this trade, elevates his team. So yeah, Chris Paul can still play, but I'm not jumping up for joy about to put the Phoenix Suns in the playoffs, because they still play in the Pacific West Division. And last time I checked, the Los Angeles Lakers are in that division, who just won the NBA championship. The Los Angeles Clippers are in that division, who are still a very formidable team. Oh, and we've got the Golden State Warriors, who are getting Klay Thompson, right, and Steph Curry and Draymond Green, and more than likely a first-round pick coming their way. So if I'm the Suns, good for you, you get Chris Paul, but I don't think they're finished. I think they either need to go out and make another trade, or I'm not sure what their draft order is, but they really need to make a splash in this year's draft to get some overall depth. Because what I'm currently looking at right now doesn't really scare me if I'm any other team in the league. I mean, do you agree with me, or are you a little more excited about
here's the interesting thing, because Chris Paul, pretty healthy this year, led Oklahoma City to the playoffs. And they were like a playoff team most of the year. It wasn't like they snuck in as the 8th seed. They were a pretty solid team. That starting lineup, in a lot of ways, is better than the Oklahoma City team. The Phoenix Suns, when you talk, Devin Booker is a legitimate all-star. DeAndre Ayton is getting better and better every year. A lot of the young guys on this team are getting better and better every single year. So I do think this is a better situation for Chris Paul. The interesting thing about this trade, too, is they gave up Kelly Oubre, who had been one of their better players. Ricky Rubio is just offset because he was already the starting point guard, and you get Chris Paul. You don't need him. And they only give away one draft pick. And that draft pick is for next year's, or maybe even 2 years from now's draft. Yeah. So, they're expecting, because Chris Paul has 2 more years on his contract, they're expecting to be a playoff team that year, and for that draft pick not to really mean as much. So, in a lot of ways, this is Phoenix playing it safe, and maybe if they can somehow get in the middle seeds in the playoffs next year, or they're a really good team and they have a good record, maybe they go out and grab another guy. And they become formidable, right? I think Chris Paul, when healthy, Devin Booker, and DeAndre Ayton is a very, very formidable 3. Yes, the rest of the roster kind of sucks, but it's a lot of young guys that can get better. It's not a lot of old guys that don't play well, right? So I'm hopeful for the Suns. I like the trade because they didn't give up 11,000 first-round picks like the Clippers did for PG-13. Still the stupidest nickname ever, too. Like, who's scared of a guy named PG-13? But so it's very interesting. It's I like it for the Suns and I like it for Oklahoma City. Now, Jared, I want to turn the tables a little bit to another trade really quickly that's likely going to happen. That's Dennis Schroeder to the Lakers for, listen to this, Jared, our favorite, Danny Green, and the 28th pick in the draft. I'll say this, Jared. What trade means more? Schroeder to the Lakers or CP3 to the Suns?
That's a good question. I think I would have to say Chris Paul to the Suns, right? Because from his experience, veteran leadership. Well, I was actually going to say something about Chris Paul before we kind of transition a little bit, so I'm gonna go back. So his veteran experience, Chris Paul, I will say, I will give it to him. The Lakers roster was, I would say, a little more complete and has a little more talent. And so the loss of Danny Green, who just every time he went up and down the court, I cringed, right? Because the guy, it looked like his knees, he could barely run up and down the court. He barely gets any type of lift on his shot. And so even though he is now a 3-time champion, it's almost like, appreciate you, good riddance, enjoy the rest of your career type of thing. Schroeder is a lot younger, a lot more athletic, a better defender, and he can shoot the 3. And so if you're the Lakers, who need more better 3-point shooting, I think this is a complete win for them. But I will say it is Chris Paul. The one thing that I wanted to go back and mention about Chris Paul, I do like the trade. I'm not trying to totally knock it. But the one thing that I'm a little curious about, and I hope, doesn't happen, but more than likely will eventually, is the development and the growth of Devin Booker and DeAndre Ayton. And not just as basketball players on the court, but leaders as that team. Because I think, this as well, and this isn't something that's a secret. Chris Paul's relationship with his teammates hasn't always been the greatest, right? You can go back to his time with the Clippers, even his time in Houston with James Harden. And there were many reports out there that Chris Paul never really vibed with his players, right? When they went on road trips or even at home, it's not like Chris Paul was going out to eat dinner or drinks and kind of just hang out and vibe with the rest of the players. Chris Paul was always kind of that outsider, right? The guy that kind of just did his thing on his own. He never really was able to fit in with any of those Clippers teammates. And that same thing carried over to Houston. And I think that's why Houston ended up getting rid of Chris Paul, because they obviously weren't going to get rid of James Harden, their all-star, superstar player. And James Harden and Chris Paul didn't really mesh together. And so for me, I look at this and say, what is this going to do to Devin Booker and DeAndre Ayton as far as their leadership roles on this team? Is this going to kind of hurt them going forward? I hope it doesn't. I hope Chris Paul can kind of, take a step back, realize that he's got 2 young studs and try to help develop them and not kind of come in with this bullish mentality that it seems like he's had in other times, because it hasn't worked. And we've obviously seen Chris Paul is now on his 4th team in his career. So I like it, and I do like the Suns still, but I hope that it's a good mesh and a good fit, not only on the court but off the court as well.
Yeah, it's a very interesting point you bring up, Jared. And Chris Paul, besides last year, really he hasn't been the best teammate. At least when things weren't going well. When things were going well, he's not divisive. I'll say that. When the Clippers were on their runs, when they were trying to get past the second round with Blake Griffin and DeAndre Jordan, they were going good. It's when it soured that it completely fell apart. Houston, and we're about to talk about this, I think it's a tough place to play. So I do agree that Paul hasn't had the best relationships, but I don't think he's Kyrie Irving or Russell Westbrook or a lot of these other guys that are kind of literally divisive in locker rooms. I think this is a 2-year rental, a $40 million rental, to say that, for Phoenix. And you go this 2-year route and you see if Devin Booker's legit. You see if DeAndre Ayton's legit. You have Chris Paul as a legitimate all-star player on your team now. If the other guys can play well, you never know, Jared. I mean, when LeBron goes away from the Lakers and the Clippers implode likely in like a few years and Golden State gets a little older, maybe it is Phoenix one of the best teams in this league one of the best teams, at least in the West, in 3 years. It can work. I do like that they're taking advantage of the fact that they went 8-0 in the bubble, and they're just going to run with that momentum. This is one of those teams, Jared, that's going to take advantage of this season starting in like a month, right? They're like, let's get it going. We got mostly young players. Chris Paul, you can take off like 15 games, whatever, and let's go. Let's try to just make the playoffs and improve this culture in Phoenix that's been pretty awful since Steve Nash and Amari Stoudemire were there. So very, very interesting. Now let's get to what I just mentioned. Houston. Last week on this podcast, we talked about Russell Westbrook wanting to leave Houston. He has not been traded as of this podcast right now at 4:20 in the afternoon on Monday, 4:20 Pacific time. Now we hear, Jared, Russell Westbrook wants to leave. James Harden's like, I don't want to be on this team by myself. I know we can't win with anybody else. And now James Harden wants out. And now the big rumor is that Kyrie and Kevin Durant, they want James Harden in Brooklyn. So what's your take on this? On now Harden and the Rockets completely imploding with these star players. Like, what the hell is going on?
Yeah, Houston's got a big problem over here, right? And obviously, we like I said, we talked about Russell Westbrook last week. James Harden, I think, is starting to realize that he can't do it on his own, right? And even before he had Westbrook, and even right before he had Chris Paul, it was basically a one-man show, right? And that was at a point when the Golden State Warriors were rolling, and they had their trio, and now the Lakers have a dominant team as well. And we've seen over the last decade that the NBA has turned into, teams that are players that are willing to kind of sacrifice and join another superstar or, become either a 2-headed monster or a 3-headed monster. And so, if you're James Harden, the idea of joining Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving in Brooklyn, I think this mainly stems from the fact that James Harden and Kevin Durant played together in their early days with Oklahoma City. Now, obviously, James Harden wasn't the player that he is now. He was actually coming off the bench as a sixth man. But, I mean, listen, especially in the East, right? We know how competitive the West is and how much parity there is in the West. If James Harden joins the Nets in the East,
my God.
I mean, who's stopping him? We know how good the Milwaukee Bucks are with Giannis, and we know how tough-minded and how good of a team the Miami Heat are, as they just made it to the finals, even though they lost to the Lakers. But realistically, man, on paper, who would beat the Nets with Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, and James Harden? The answer in the East is 0.
Yeah.
I forgot the Boston Celtics, who are a very good team as well. Right, very formidable. But this would just now. Here's a question for you: do you like how these superstars are joining together? Right, there was a lot of backlash when Kevin Durant went to Golden State, and many people were saying it wasn't necessarily just because of basketball purposes. It was because of his contract with Nike and how many of those obligations kind of factored in. But do you like superstars joining together, or do you prefer the old school way of a player, sticking with his team and trying to gut it out.
You know, it's circumstantial each time. Kevin Durant joining an already final 73 winning team, that's BS, right? I think everybody didn't agree with that unless you're a Warriors fan. There's probably some Warriors fans who were like, this is kind of sucks, right? Now it's going to be less legitimate. And a lot of those finals were very boring with Kevin Durant. The only one that wasn't was when Kevin Durant blew out his Achilles. That's the only reason one of the Warriors finals was good. You look at LeBron and Wade and Bosh, them all joining up is annoying, right? Because, you know, that's not what it should be. The Heat sucked, and then all of a sudden now we're the best team in the league. I don't like that. For James Harden, though, he tried his best with Houston. He was a secondary player in Oklahoma City. He earned superstar status. He became one of the best players in the NBA. They tried to give him everyone possible, and it just didn't work. So if he ends up joining the Nets, who are already a team, it's not like they all came together. Now, I know Durant joined Brooklyn because he wanted to play in New York, and then Kyrie comes along, right, to Brooklyn too. I'm fine with that. James Harden joining that team is not as bad as the other circumstances. Do I like it? No. But I don't mind it if it's Chris Paul trying it with the Clippers and then leaving. And it's Harden trying to win a championship with the Rockets for years and years and then leaving, right? You know, Westbrook leaving Oklahoma City after trying so many years and going to Houston to try to win a championship. I'm okay with that. It's when it's really manufactured that I hate it. It's new school NBA. It's the way it is. And, you know, we're starting to get used to it. It happened with the Clippers. It happened with the Lakers. It's happened with the Brooklyn Nets. I guess if you're a Celtics fan, which me and you are obviously not, you love that team hasn't been one of those teams that stack their team. They've done it the right way. But, you know, this is the way the NBA is now. When you have the best player switching teams every 3-4 years, everybody else is going to do it, right? You watch what your leader does, and you're going to do it. LeBron started all this, and everyone just followed. I can't blame all the other players for following what LeBron did as the leader of the NBA, right?
Yeah, you know, I look at this from 2 points, and you bring up something interesting that I kind of popped in my head. And you said that James Harden, you know, tried his best in Houston, and it's almost like we're acting like it's a foregone conclusion that he's going to be traded. You're right. He's still a Houston Rocket. He's not been traded yet.
And so is Westbrook too. Westbrook is still,
right. Westbrook is still technically with the Houston Rockets. You know, have we ever thought about the fact that maybe it's James Harden that's the problem? Right? He had Chris Paul, and we just talked about Chris Paul not being the best teammate, but you know, James Harden could have been a problem, you know, as well. And now with Russell Westbrook, more than likely a foregone conclusion that he's going to be leaving as well. Can James Harden play with other potential superstars? Because let's not forget, when James Harden was in Oklahoma City, I think we can say that Kevin Durant at that point was a budding superstar, but I wouldn't say Russell Westbrook was at the time. You know, so maybe it's James Harden. And breaking news, there's only one basketball to go around. So if James Harden were to go to the Nets, you can't sit here and tell me that we're not going to have that team is not going to have issues. Kyrie Irving loves to have the ball in his hands, right? He is a playmaker. That is what he does. Kevin Durant can play off the ball, but we all know that he likes to have the ball in his hands as well. And then James Harden, the reason why Chris Paul left was because there was friction between those two of who gets the ball more. And now with Russell Westbrook on that team, who also, that's the reason why he's more than likely gone. So with only one ball to go around, I can see some potential problems eventually. Now, if you're winning, some of those things I think can you know, be kind of pushed under the rug. But the Nets start losing, you know, they lose 3 or 4 games in a row or something like that. I mean, I don't know, man. All 3 of those guys are ball dominant. How do you counteract that if you're Steve Nash as the first time ever head coach, right? I mean, D'Antoni is now on that staff as an assistant, and obviously he has a lot of familiarity with James Harden. Sorry, but you know, I'm just looking at this and saying I can see some potential problems. You know, if one of these players gets frustrated that they're not getting enough touches.
I'll say this. It's interesting that discussion with Harden, I mean, he in the playoffs in the biggest games was the problem. That I still remember, man. Game 7, Rockets. Chris Paul, I think, was out with like a broken thumb, and the Rockets missed like 43s, and Harden went like 1 for 15, right? And so did everybody else. And I still do think, Jared, man, if Chris Paul played in that game, I think we would have been talking about the Rockets in the finals and the Rockets potentially winning the finals. So as much as I want to sit here and crap on Harden, he's been that close. And joining a team with Kyrie Irving, who won a championship and made the biggest shot, one of the biggest shots in NBA history against the Warriors to win it with LeBron in Cleveland, and Kevin Durant now having championship pedigree as well, and being the leader of those Warriors teams. That's how good of a player he was. I couldn't think of a better team to join, maybe besides the Lakers at this point. So I like it. You can see a lot of dribbling from those guys, and a lot of less, a lot of guys, it's going to be 120 points scored in the game. It's going to be 90 from those 3 guys, right? I urge you guys to look on social media. There's a video going around of someone playing 2K, and they're like, oh, here's a Nets possession if Harden goes. It's Kevin Durant. They pass him in the ball. He dribbles a couple times, pass to Harden. Harden dribbles for like 6 seconds, gives it to Kyrie. Kyrie dribbles for 6 seconds, and they pass to Durant, and Durant makes the 3. That's what every possession is going to look like. So it's going to be very interesting if he ends up going to the Nets or if he ends up going anywhere else. I will say this, though. Houston does have a problem. For sure, Jared. You got that right on the dot. And, hey, might as well rebuild. Why try to keep these guys if you don't really have a chance at the championship? Quick rebuild. Do it like the Celtics did, right? And get back to being contenders. And so it's going to be interesting. And maybe on this next podcast, we'll be talking about Westbrook and Harden committing to the team. But I'm not going to say that until that's true. And I do think both these guys are gone. I know Michael Jordan wants Russell Westbrook. I heard that rumor today, and we've been hearing that at the top of the list. Harden wants to play for the Nets. So very, very. But that's going to be the end of this podcast, guys. We'll be back talking about the NBA draft. I know I said that last podcast, but then we recorded this one because there was so much to talk about. We'll be talking about the NBA draft for sure on the next podcast. We'll see where all these NBA trades end up going, and we'll talk about a big week in the NFL. 2 other games I wanted to mention on the NFL schedule too, real quick, that we did not mention that are big. We obviously talked about the Cardinals and Seahawks on Thursday Night Football and the Raiders and Chiefs. You also have Titans, Ravens, and Packers, Colts, and Rams, Buccaneers. So it's going to be a big NFL week, and it's going to be very, very interesting to watch. For this podcast, though, it is done. I am Nick Nenad.
I'm Jared Smith.
Do it like DeAndre Hopkins and just catch the ball, guys. Just catch the ball. No, that's the end of the podcast, guys. See ya.